Madam President, I come to the floor today along with my colleague from Vermont to introduce a joint resolution expressing the sense of Congress that the so-called chained CPI should not be used for the purposes of calculating Social Security benefits or benefits for disabled veterans. As we work to reduce the deficit in a balanced and responsible manner, many have discussed changing the measure of inflation used to calculate cost of living allowances to a measure of inflation called the chained CPI. Now, some claim that the chained CPI is a more accurate measure of inflation because it takes into account the fact that consumers may change their spending behavior and substitute items with lower price increases for items with higher price increases. As a result of this feature, the chained CPI results in a lower measure of inflation. Now, all of this may seem very technical, but the impact of requiring Social Security or veterans' disability COLAs, cost of living adjustments, to be based on the chained CPI is anything but technical. It will have real and negative impacts on our seniors and those who become disabled as a result of service in the armed forces. In fact, the most adversely impacted would be the oldest and the poorest. And I don't think anything could be more unfair or inappropriate or really unnecessary. As this first chart shows, the chained CPI is a real cut in Social Security benefits. According to Social Security Works, this policy would reduce annual Social Security benefits for the average worker at age 75 by $658 a year, by age 85 by $1,147, and by age 95 by $1,622. Over here you see the cumulative cut. In other words, what would happen over the years from 65 to 75, you'd lose about $4,600. By 85, you'd lose $13,900. By age 95, you'd lose $28,000. I think a couple of things that this chart shows is that you're penalized for living longer. The longer you live, the more you're penalized. Now you might say, well, $658 a year by the time you're 75, that doesn't sound like a lot. Yeah, not to some of us, not to us. Look at our incomes. Look at the kind of retirement programs we have. Yeah, of course, if you're in the upper quintile, of course, that doesn't seem like much. But again, if you look at a second chart that I have here, you will see who really gets hurt. It's the poorer you are. So if you are in the lowest quintile, lowest 20% of making money, in other words, let's put it this way. Let's say that you are 65 and your total income is less than $12,554 a year. That puts you below the poverty line. The total amount of your income that comes from Social Security is 84.3%. Well, you might think, well, if you're making less than that, wouldn't all of your money come from Social Security? Well, the answer is yes, but, and I question people about this, if you're making that little amount of money and you're over 65, you're probably working on some part-time job. You're babysitting maybe, you're cleaning houses, maybe you're a greeter at a store. You're probably doing something to add to your income, but it only amounts to about 16%. Most of it comes from Social Security. And you can see even after you get up to $20,000 a year, it's about the same. About 84% of your money comes from Social Security. So if you take a cut in Social Security and your lower income, that's where you get whacked the most. Now, of course, when you get up here to the fifth quintile, you're making more than $57,957 a year. Only 17% of your income comes from Social Security. So you say, well, if you took 600 and some bucks a year from that, yeah, you can probably afford it. But even if you look here at up to $57,000 a year in the fourth quintile, almost half, 43.5% of your total income comes from Social Security. So even if you're making $30,000, $35,000 a year after 65, half of your income comes from Social Security. So again, when you start making these kinds of cuts in the change CPI, you might say, well, it's only $658 a year. Well, for someone in the lower quintiles there, you know, that's like a month worth of food, perhaps, maybe 6 weeks worth of food. Tell me that doesn't have an effect. Of course it has an effect. Now, if you're in the upper income, probably don't have that much to worry about. That's why I say the pernicious effect of change CPI is the longer you live, the more you're penalized, and the lower your income, the bigger whack you're taking out of your total income. So again, as people get older, they're more likely to have depleted all of their sources of retirement income, assuming they even have any to begin with. So a couple of facts I think that are pertinent here. First, today, only 1 in 5 Americans have a defined benefit pension that will last until the day they die. 1 in 5. When I first came to the Congress, it was 1 in 2. 1 out of every 2 Americans, Madam President, had a defined benefit pension that would last them till the day they died. Now it's 1 in 5, and it's getting less all the time. Secondly, and this startles a lot of people, 50% of the American populace have less than $10,000 in savings. Less than $10,000. 1 out of every 2 Americans has less than $10,000 in savings. Well, you can see if you have that when you retire, that's going to be gone pretty soon. So then you're going to rely again strictly upon Social Security. So when you put those two facts together, 1 out of 5, only 1 out of 5, 4 out of 5. 4 out of 5 have no pension, and half have less than $10,000 in savings. Then you see that soon after you retire, the only thing you've got left is Social Security. So it's already hard enough now for millions of people hoping to retire, but then you put change CPI in there, and you really are hitting the oldest and the poorest. So again, I know people are saying, well, we got to do something to save Social Security for those in the future. Well, I agree with that. That's why I always like, whenever I see a really honest assessment of Social Security for the future, an honest assessment says Social Security can't continue to exist as it is. Well, I agree with that, as it is. But then there are two approaches. Do you whack the benefits, or do you increase the revenues that come into Social Security? Two different approaches. You have to cut the benefits. In fact, I would say that by talking about change CPI, the signal you're sending to the younger generation is, well, maybe when you get there, we'll whack it some more. Now, a lot of young people are saying, well, I don't know if Social Security is going to be there for me when I get that age. Well, when they hear people talking about change CPI and cutting this, they're right to be worried whether or not we're going to keep our promise to this next generation that we will have a Social Security system that they can rely on and count on. And so what's to be done? Well, last year I introduced legislation that would basically extend the life of the Social Security Trust Fund to 2050 and give a $65 a month increase to every Social Security recipient, and yet extend the life of it for over 18 more years. How we do that? Very simply. We raise the wage cap of people that pay into Social Security from $113,000 a year, which it is now, over 10 years. We raise it and do away with it after 10 years. Now, there's another approach too. The National Association of Social Insurers, NASI, did a poll earlier this year, and they asked people, would you be willing, young people, ask workers, would you be willing to go from 6.2% paying into Social Security to 7.2%, a 1% increase over 20 years, if that would help secure Social Security. 80, 90% of Republicans and Democrats who self-identified as that said yes. Over 20 years, a 1% increase, that's nothing. But if you were to take that and raise the wage cap, you could increase Social Security payments by $65 a month and secure Social Security for up to 75 years. That seems to me, if you want to send a message to young people about the sanctity and stability of Social Security, you would say that rather than we're going to cut it. We're going to have this so-called chained CPI. As I said, I know it sounds technical, but it's not technical at all. I once likened chained CPI to an anchor chain. You're standing on the boat, the anchor chain gets around your ankle, and someone throws the anchor overboard. Where are you going? You're going down. And that's what chained CPI does. The older you get, the more you get hit on it. And the poorer you are, the more you get hit. So again, this idea that we've got to somehow cut benefits, have this chained CPI in order to save Social Security is not, it's wrong. It's just wrong. There are other ways of doing it that would be widely, broadly supported by the American people. Go out and ask any group. Ask any group of seniors. Do you think we ought to raise the wage cap so that someone who's making $500,000 a year pays in at the same rate as someone who is making $50,000 a year? Well, of course. That's not the case now. You make $50,000 a year, you pay into Social Security on every dime you make. If you make $500,000 a year, you're only paying in on the first about 20 cents of every dollar you make. After that, you don't pay into Social Security. I think the average American would say that's not fair. What's good for someone making $100,000 a year ought to be the same for someone making $1 million a year. And so there are other ways of securing Social Security. This chained CPI sends the wrong message to young people. It exacerbates this concern that young people have, is Social Security going to be there for when I retire? I always tell them, well, do you believe the United States government will exist when you retire? And they say, yes. I said, well, if that's the case, Social Security will be there because it's backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government. Now, what are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to cut that full faith and credit? And tell young people, well, it'll be there, but we may take cuts here, and there may be cuts there and cuts there. What's a young person to think? Am I really going to have what I think I'm going to be able to have and count on in Social Security? This is a trust. My friend from Vermont is always talking about this is a trust fund. It is a trust. It does not add to the deficit. Think about the word trust. Social Security Trust Fund. You got to be able to trust it. Young people need to be able to trust it, that it will be there for them. The best way to undermine that is to go to this chained CPI. With that, Madam President, I yield to my good friend and who knows this issue better than just about anybody I know, and who has fought so hard on behalf of Social Security and keeping that trust fund and keeping the trust in Social Security. So I yield the floor to Senator Sanders.